My husband yelled at me during a barbecue with friends, but one friend's unexpected move turned everyone against him. Last Saturday's barbecue was supposed to be perfect. I'd spent all morning marinating steaks, making potato salad from scratch with Mom's old recipe, and setting up fairy lights in our backyard that I'd bought on sale last month. Our friends were coming over, people we'd known for years who'd become like family, the kind of people who knew which pizza toppings we preferred and remembered anniversaries. My husband Garrett had been stressed about work lately, snapping at me over little things that never used to bother him. The way I loaded the dishwasher was apparently inefficient. The coffee I made was consistently too weak for his refined palate. The route I took to the grocery store was a waste of gas. Even the way I folded his work shirts had become a source of irritation. I kept making excuses for his behavior, creating elaborate justifications in my mind. It was just temporary stress from the promotion he wanted but hadn't gotten after 2 years of promises. The long hours his demanding boss kept piling on without additional compensation. The pressure from quarterly reviews that determined his bonus. I convinced myself that once he relaxed with friends, he'd return to being himself again. The man I married who used to bring me flowers just because it was Tuesday, who would dance with me in the kitchen while dinner was cooking, who used to tell me I was beautiful when I first woke up in the morning. But lately that man seemed to be disappearing piece by piece, replaced by someone who found fault with everything I did. Small criticisms that individually seemed petty, but collectively made me feel like I was walking through an emotional minefield in my own home, never knowing what innocent action would trigger his displeasure next. The transformation had been so gradual I almost didn't notice it happening. It started with helpful suggestions that slowly morphed into corrections that eventually became outright criticism. When I mentioned feeling hurt by his tone, he'd explain that he was just trying to help me improve, that he noticed things because he cared about me. Somehow I'd gotten convinced that his constant feedback was a sign of investment in our relationship rather than a pattern of control. I'd stopped talking about the pottery classes I'd been taking on Thursday evenings because he'd made comments about the expense. I'd quit mentioning lunch dates with my sister because he'd point out how much money I was spending on restaurant meals. I'd even stopped humming while I did housework because he'd told me it was distracting when he was trying to work from home. Looking back, I could see how systematically I'd been erasing myself to avoid his criticism, but at the time it felt like I was just being considerate, accommodating, like a good wife should be. Everything started fine that Saturday evening. Everyone arrived around 6, bringing drinks and side dishes like we'd coordinated through our group text. Our friend Vivian brought her famous mac and cheese that everyone always raved about. The kind with 3 different expensive cheeses and that perfectly crispy breadcrumb topping that took her 2 hours to prepare. Her husband Dennis carried the heavy cooler, joking about how many different craft beers he'd packed for the guys to sample, including some local brewery selections he'd been wanting everyone to try. My college roommate Tessa showed up fashionably late as always, carrying expensive wine and animated stories about her new job at the boutique marketing firm downtown, where she was finally doing the creative work she'd always dreamed about. Even Quiet Ben from next door came over with homemade brownies, still warm from the oven and smelling like chocolate heaven, shyly explaining that he'd tried a new recipe with sea salt and espresso that he hoped everyone would enjoy. The weather was absolutely perfect. Warm, but not humid, with a gentle breeze that made the fairy lights dance and kept the mosquitoes at bay. I felt genuinely proud of how everything looked after all my preparation. The yard was immaculate after I'd spent 2 hours that morning